Okay. All right, folks, please settle down. We'll start our second panel, and then after this panel, we are off to lunch. So I don't want this panel to get compete with lunch. So let's get started. And it's my pleasure to have this to moderate this panel. And as you can see, the title of this panel is emerging AI technologies in the healthcare context. Now, of course, that's an extremely broad topic, but we will have a more focused version of this discussion. So let me first introduce the panelists. So we have, I'm going to give a brief introduction for everyone. It's a very distinguished panel. So we have Dr. Rick Kuntz. Maybe Rick can raise your hand. He's a senior advisor to several medtech startup companies. He's the former chief medical and scientific officer for Medtronic. And while at Medtronic, he served as senior vice president and president of neuromodulation, later as the chief medical and scientific officer. Dr. Kuntz has also served as associate professor of medicine at Harvard Medical School, chief of the division of clinical biometrics as an interventional cardiologist in the division of cardiovascular disease at Brigham and Women's Hospital. And in his public service, he served as founding governor of the Patient-Centered Outcomes Research Institute, PCORI, that many of the researchers would have heard of, which is part of the US Affordable Care Act. So welcome, Rick. Then sitting next to him, we have Dr. Eric Williamson. Dr. Williamson is professor of radiology at the Mayo Clinic in Rochester. He is the Enterprise Radiology Informatics Chair at Mayo Clinic and directs the radiology program. Dr. Williamson serves also as the Chief Medical Informatics Officer at Mayo Clinic. He's past chair of Enterprise Radiology Informatics, and he previously led the Enterprise Radiology AI program. And he's the medical director of the Animate program at Mayo, which is focused on translation of multi-speciality AI tools into clinical practice. Next to him, we have James Southwick. Jim took up the role of managing director for the Minnesota MedTech 3.0 coalition in February of this year. This actually is a very important initiative that he will talk about. And the Minnesota MedTech 3.0 coalition was initiated by the Medtronic CEO along with the CEOs of Mayo Clinic and health partners, and includes University of Minnesota and other academic partners, including Medical Alley and representatives from the VC industry and other partners. And of course, also the Governor Walz's administration is quite closely involved. We have at the end over there, Dr. Rodolphe Katra. Dr. Katra is the Global Chief AI Officer and a technical fellow at Medtronic. And he's he's leading the efforts in the AI, at an AI Center of Excellence at Medtronic, and he's leading all these efforts. And he has a number of years of engineering and experience in the biomedical space. That is where he has a PhD in that area, and he also has an MBA. And then we have, right next to me, our very own, from University of Minnesota, Dr. Chris Stignelli. He's a faculty member of surgery in the Division of Acute Care Surgery at the U of M. And he's also the Associate Dean of Data Science and co-director of UMN's program for Clinical Artificial Intelligence and co-director of UMN's Q-Code program. So we have, as you can see, a very distinguished panel here. And we are going to, what I did was I actually gave a prompt for this panel and then a set of questions. So could we have that one sheet of paper that I put over there? What we will do is we will put the prompt on the screen. And no, that's not the one. That was not the prompt. Anyway, so we will have the prompt of the panel, which I will read out also, and a set of questions. And the format we will follow is that this particular panel was with a sort of, I would call it a panel with a specific kind of purpose, okay? And let's see, could we have, okay, well, I'm going to read it out. You will see there. So the panel prompt really is that thank you, Chris. Sometimes paper technology is better than digital. Okay, that ever more data about a person's health is being collected, not just at the clinic and in the hospital, but in all aspects of their lives. There's a growing sense with increasing evidence that all of the data has crucial information which can help improve a person's overall health and well-being. This idea is often expressed as healthcare needs to move from being episodic and reactive to continuous and proactive. In fact, Rick is one of the people who has talked about that literally all over the world. Since AI is the technology that helps make sense of the vast amounts of data, its promise in healthcare is clear. So discussion on how this could be achieved, what are interesting examples, and what needs to be done is the focus of this panel. Okay, so again, to the people managing the AV, if you could have that page that I mentioned that I have given to you already, the whole audience could see what the questions are. But anyway, the first, so I put about 6 questions together, and then we have a bunch of other follow-on questions. And for these questions, I'm going to ask the question, then even identified a lead person to first answer that, and then others will add to it. So the first question is, can you elaborate a bit more on this vision of healthcare needs to move from being episodic and reactive to continuous and proactive? And clearly, Rick, we want to hear first from you.
Sure. So it's a rather large statement to move from episodic care to preventive care, because the healthcare system, especially in the U.S., is so anchored in fee-for-service. And so physicians, surgeons get paid to take care of patients who are sick. To try to prevent sickness would have to change the way we get paid. So this is an effort that's been going on for a long time. At Medtronic, when I worked there, we called this value-based healthcare. It was a little bit of a jingoistic title to some of our programs, in that as we sold medical devices, how could we demonstrate value to the healthcare system to patients in terms of everything from savings to improvements of quality adjusted life years. It's very difficult to do that, but ultimately we would like to reduce the episodes of care. As an interventional cardiologist, that to me is like an acute thrombosis of the coronary artery or heart attack, by looking at ways to prevent them and to move care to a more diagnostic preventive strategy. And I've got a lot of examples of that as we go on to what's happening, especially in the cardiac radiological space.
Okay, thanks. Yeah.
Just to add on to that, it's super interesting. We've been talking about this for a while. If you put an implantable device in a patient, you kind of have a monitor, right, that goes with them, which is amazing. But there are also opportunities for us to really leverage those episodes of care that are already going to take place anyway, with what Rick is talking about with regard to ongoing monitoring. We definitely see patients in an episodic way. So when a patient comes in and gets, for instance, I'm a cardiovascular radiologist, so Rick and I are kind of simpatico in this regard. We do these, cardiac MRIs or CTs from the top of the head to the tips of the toes. We answer the clinical question that's being asked at the time, and then frankly, we discard the rest of that data. And this has been going on for decades, right? We basically throw away 99% of the information that we've acquired, and there's an opportunity really for us to leverage some of the episodes of care, capture data that we're already recording, and then begin to use the power of AI to leverage new insights that weren't previously possible. So we love the implantable device, love the wearables and things like that as consumer tech and clinical tech, kind of the lines blur, but we should also continue to focus on those episodes of care, because there really is opportunity to leverage information that is currently not being taken advantage of in our healthcare system. So I think this what you're talking about, this transition, is really an exciting time for us to do lots of different things.
Let me just add on one thing to your CT angiogram approach. If we look at trying to prevent heart attacks. So when I practiced interventional cardiologist, I always got a call at 3 in the morning for someone who had an acute thrombosis. We could look at cholesterol, fat levels in the blood, look at risk factors. They're very, very poor measures of who's going to have a heart attack. On the other hand, when you look at the data from a CT angiogram, there are several companies now that are analyzing plaque composition, and they have developed a prospective study that was actually published in the New England Journal of Medicine last year, demonstrating that just looking at plaque composition identifies not flow-limiting blockages, but blockages that will become thrombotic and cause 100% occlusion. And then there are a set of medications that have been developed, some of them old, like colchicine, that can change the composition of the plaque to make it more hard rather than soft, that can be followed by CTA. This is a complete game changer in the way one will take care of coronary disease, rather than taking your blood pressure, seeing if you had risk factors, and telling you to watch out and take some aspirin, as opposed to understanding that you have a mid-left anterior descending artery plaque that looks very vulnerable, and we're going to make that plaque less vulnerable with medication.
Yeah, it's an exciting time. And just as you say, we've been chasing these secondary markers like cholesterol, right? I remember what a difficult time we had with my father trying to get his cholesterol under control, which was great, except that looking at his plaque directly using an imaging test or doing additional, more advanced predictives really gives us new insights that we didn't have previously. And I agree with you. We're at a tipping point. And a lot of this, the companies that you're talking about, they're shocker leveraging AI like everybody else is, right, to do these analysis that would be very difficult to do with just the power of the human eye. So that's a good time. I feel like we're dominating the conversation. Sorry about that.
Well, let's see. Maybe Chris, as a practicing doctor yourself.
Yeah, so a lot of the work that I do is in the ICU, and we're seeing similar things in the ICU. So for example, I did my fellowship at University of Michigan, and they actually had this ICU monitoring program that they had a screen that had kind of a little box for each room in the ICU, or each bed in the ICU. And it had different predictive algorithms that it would run, and it would kind of light up the rooms as like red, yellow, or green, and that could kind of tell us that, hey, based on the patient's vital signs, and it just used vital signs, it was very primitive back then, but based on the patient's vital signs, this patient is moving into a sicker state. So we have different like early warning systems that exists in healthcare, like the Muse score and things like that. And that's just like an early example of how we can use informatics approaches to kind of predict what a patient's trajectory would be, instead of, oh no, the patient's blood pressure just dropped, now we got to do something. So I think we're going to be seeing a lot more of that. I think that we're going to start seeing the integration of unstructured data, such as notes and images, integrated into these predictive algorithms. I think there's going to be a lot more of these things coming. I think you're also going to start seeing it in the intraoperative setting. There's a few companies out there, OR Blackbox, Theator, what's the fourth one or third one? It begins with an A. I think it's IBO Health. They're doing intraoperative analysis to try to predict, what's happening in the operating room. So, yeah.
Can I add to the physician side of the house, something non-physician based? Maybe from a voice of technology, what this triggered for me, that saying moving to proactive care, is where this healthcare industry is moving because of some of the AI capabilities. So you may have heard of the Healthcare 5.0. This is the next evolution we anticipate healthcare to go through. We are currently in Healthcare 4.0, characterized by a lot of use of AI on a generalizable level. So all the approved algorithms that are used in healthcare right now are more generalized on population. Healthcare 5.0 is going to take this to another level, where we believe it's going to be characterized by the 4 Ps. One, it's going to be participatory. So there's going to be a lot of wearables data. There's going to be a lot of wellness data, a lot of data that's not from the healthcare system necessarily brought into a holistic management of a given patient. So that's the first P. It's going to be predictive. So it's going to look into the future, and it's going to tell you things before they happen. And if you think about it, what Rick was talking about, this is a complete change, because you're talking about somebody who hasn't even come to the healthcare system yet, and you're now predicting something. You're not just treating them after they come into the hospital. So that's the second one. Preventative is another piece. We believe we're going to act on things before they actually occur. And how do you prove a negative? Like, this is a clinical trial paradigm shift, because you're going to intervene on something before it occurs in hopes and able to prove that it's not going to happen in the future because of your intervention, and that's the third one. The last one is personalized. We believe we're going to move from this generalizable set of algorithms designed on a population, group A versus group B, with a 0.05 statistical significance, to an N of 1 type clinical trials. And we don't have that clinical language yet to design trials that are super personalized at an N of 1 level. So that's the Healthcare 5.0, that's the trajectory, and that moves us from these episodic reactionary care to prospective predictive and preventative care that's hyper-personalized. And AI has been opening the door for some of that, and you've been seeing a lot of literature come out around the prediction of an impending event from normal sinus rhythm, the prediction of a future adverse event that could be prevented by a prophylactic taking of certain medication and so on. So that's the transition we're seeing from a technology side. That's all been made possible through some of these analytics capabilities that were not leveraged in such a larger way before.
Great. So, well, thank you everyone for the perspective. I guess we got medical perspective as well as engineering perspective on that. So let's actually move on to the second question, which actually there's an effort, as I mentioned, this thing called MedTech 3.0, and since Jim heads that, he can talk to us more about this. Very tied to the overall theme of this panel. So Jim, so what is MedTech 3.0 and what role does it see for AI in healthcare?
So I've had the privilege of joining the Minnesota MedTech 3.0 effort, as Jaideep said, from February, and it's a tremendous effort and opportunity inside Minnesota that was initiated by several of the CEOs across our healthcare and research and university and government systems, with the idea of invigorating the whole ecosystem of innovation in healthcare in Minnesota, with an innovation, but also a healthcare and economic development perspective. Right? This is a major economic driver in the state: healthcare broadly, medtech, and clinical care especially. And a sense that there are other places in the world where a lot of innovation and a lot of focus is happening, and we don't want to just rest on our laurels. We want to ensure the future of this industry in Minnesota, because a lot of it came from Minnesota. So it's pulled together all these critical institutions and players around a strategy. And this strategy has different components, which I won't take the time to go into all of them, but one of them is in this area of data. It's a crucial aspect because, as you've been hearing, as we've been talking about, the application of AI in medical technology is a critical innovation frontier, and if we're going to lead in the industry, we need to lead in that area. I think it's important, though, to call out something that's been clear in the room, but maybe we should actually name. As we've been talking, in my mind, about two fundamentally different categories. I think one of the last panelists mentioned the difference between clinical and non-clinical care. So a lot of what we're talking about in healthcare AI were our solutions that are going to improve the administration of care in hospitals. It's not clinical itself. It is helping to take the notes. It's helping to operate the scheduling and the systems and the prior authorizations and the claims and all the things that contribute to efficiency and operations. And there are many AI solutions there. But lately here, what we're talking about is a different category, which is the application of AI tools in things that improve the 4 Ps, that actually contribute to diagnosis and treatment and actually application of care in patients. And this is really important for Minnesota as well, because this latter category is the medical technology issue. It is industry, where we have Medtronic, Boston Scientific, Abbott, Philips, Coloplast, Baxter. We have the leading companies in this industry and the leading innovators that are bringing these actual improvements in diagnosis and care. And I think you've heard some of the examples, but I think it sometimes helps to just keep putting the examples out there about what we're talking about. One thing I love is something that I've seen Rodolph show from Medtronic, and I know it's public, is an AI tool, for example, that assists a clinician in looking at, on a colonoscopy, looking at the images. And maybe after you look at colonoscopies for 8 or 10 hours a day, you're a little tired of what you're looking at. And I think there's even data that if you should get your colonoscopy in the morning when the clinicians are less tired and they're less likely to miss the polyps. Well, this is an AI tool that will, on the scope in real time while the clinician is looking, put little green squares and says, look here, look here, look here. We think this may be a polyp. It helps. And that's an illustration. There are numerous examples. Better targeting and planning of your brain surgery to get to the right place. Looking inside your lung at a very small tissue area that may be malignant, using AI to help identify and diagnose. And these are things that enable earlier intervention and care. Well, getting access to the data to develop all those tools is a fundamental infrastructure problem for our innovation ecosystem. My example from Medtronic of the green squares helping to identify the polyps, I've been told that Medtronic trained that AI on 13 million colonoscopy images. And so if you are a startup and you have a new idea, or even if you're a major company and you have an idea to innovate, how easy is it to go get 13 million colonoscopy images from a healthcare system so that you can develop and test your technology and your idea? It is very burdensome, slow, expensive, complicated to get those things. And so one of the ideas of our program is that if we can build the systems and platforms, and this isn't glamorous, this is in the weeds, nuts and bolts, who has data, what terms and conditions, what privacy requirements, legal requirements, how can you make a more systematized platform for access to that kind of data? And I think as we do this, my last thought is that we do need to differentiate different types of health AI that's non-clinical from medtech research, because the data that's needed and the problems in getting access to the data, they're going to be different in those situations. So we need to break these problems down granularly and tackle them separately and establish platforms that will make and contribute to Minnesota being the most dynamic place for this type of medtech innovation that's going to be relying on that type of AI research.
So, thank you, Jim, for giving a perspective on that. In fact, we have here Eric from Mayo, and we have Chris here from U of M. And Mayo has this great digital platform that provides access. And could you talk a bit about that? And
Sure.
maybe Chris, after that, you could talk a little bit about the CLHSs that you have.
Yeah, and I love the way that you drew a couple of different distinctions, but in particular the innovations that are built on medical information, but that do not themselves enable the diagnosis of medicine. There are a number of different requirements. I think the FDA has 4 different requirements that you have to go through. And if the answer is yes to any of them, then what you're building is a medical device. And if the answer is no to all of them, then it's non-medical device. And non-medical devices, from a regulatory standpoint, a lot easier to work on. So, so the exactly what Jim is talking about creating really a platform that's unified across multiple systems so that we can leverage data that exists in multiple different places, in multiple different pockets, even within a single institution. And that's really what the Mayo Clinic platform was intended to do as well, was to take medical data and then de-identify it in a certified way so that it could essentially be used under glass, so that an innovator could utilize that information to build algorithms and build tools without ever violating any of the regulatory issues that exist with regard to HIPAA data, but then also not having any crossover on the IP side as well, right? So that's the intention, is to try to figure out a way to democratize the data and make sure that there is when there's a medical use for it, that we can build the solutions that we need. And so it's exciting to see this innovation, because this space is hard, right? And it's hard for startups. So it's important that there really are groups of large organizations that are willing to put their money where their mouth is with regard to infrastructure.
Yeah. Chris, you want to add your perspective on this?
Sure, happy to. So we are, I'm the co-director of the Center for Learning Health System Sciences data platform. We call it C-Code. And within that data, it includes data on all the mHealth Fairview patients that we have. So it's about 3.4 million patients, and includes stuff like clinical notes, vital signs, et cetera. It also includes radiographic images. It includes some procedural videos as well. So very similar to the Mayo Clinic platform. we make this available within the North Star Data Alliance, which is kind of that data core that sits within MedTech 3.0. Which is, and this is, as has been said already a couple times, this is kind of a critical piece that a lot of the MedTech companies are lacking. They got a great idea, you got the tech, but you need the data to train, or maybe you train on some publicly available data, now you need some data to validate.
Okay. Thanks. Anyone else wants to add some thoughts to it? Rick or Rudolph? Okay.
Well, I mean, maybe. So Jim said it well. This is we're talking about medical versus regulated versus unregulated, and there's nuances there which we won't get to unless you want to. But the issue at hand is all of these solutions. There's everybody talks about the last sexy mile, the validation of the algorithm, the final development. But about 80% of any given solution is trench warfare, data, sanitizing data engineering, data collection, cohorting. There's a tremendous amount of work because all of our data systems are biased by definition. So, and I would go toe to toe with anybody who would tell us our data are not. So the deliberate activities around pooling data from multiple sources, multiple locations, multiple systems to kind of address some of these bias issues becomes super critical if you're building regulated medical devices. But that doesn't show up on the validation phases. You can't at the end kind of decide, I want to now make it a little bit more generalizable. You have to design these processes, and those elements of these alliances on data and being able to source these data to be representative of the population it's supposed to serve is a key component that gets resolved in the data engineering phases, and that's 80% of the work. So,
yes, Rick, go ahead.
Just to add to that, I think that the regulatory pathway is going to be complex in this area for a couple of reasons. And I'll give you a couple examples. Again, in cardiology, there's a company called CathWorks that will basically use an algorithm to tell you when you do an angiogram exactly what the tightness of the stenosis are. It's not approved by the FDA to do that. It's an assistant to the cardiologist to use it. And that's going to be a pathway that's going to be used by a lot. So I talked about the plaque companies. There are 3 plaque companies now. There's the HeartFlow out of Stanford. There's the Lucid out of Boston. And then there's Clearly out of New York. All are trying to do the same thing, take basic CT angiogram information, reprocess it using machine learning to identify plaque structure, and then provide that information to a radiologist or cardiologist, who then would basically either act on that or not act on it. But that radiologist is actually making the final interpretation of the AI algorithm. The AI algorithm is not claiming that it's identifying soft plaque or hard plaque. It's identifying a process that is then interpreted by a licensed physician. And so I think it's going to be kind of a weak pathway to do that for a while, because I think there's going to be a lot of burden on the interpreter of that, because they're not going to know exactly how the algorithm is built. But that's kind of like the soft area that we're in right now, is to understand exactly how these explosion of AI-assisted processes and programs are going to be regulated, and what kind of claims can they make, and what's the responsibility of the physician who signs off on them.
Yeah, I think this is a key point, right? This did you call it a gray area? It's not quite a loophole, right? This licensed practitioner exemption, right? Which we are rolling out. Most of the stuff that we do is, as long as there's a human in the loop who certifies that, right? Where Jim's talking about, you're going to put a little green square on everything that's a polyp. Sure, but the algorithm's not saying, that's a polyp, you have cancer, here's the next step. What it's saying is, look over here. And the expert, tired or not, right, it's that person's responsibility to look over there and say, no, that's not a polyp, that's a shadow, next. Or in the case of plaque, it's the responsibility of the cardiovascular imager to look at that and say, I don't think that's vulnerable plaque. I think you've got a little motion artifact there. I'm going to move on, right? So I won't say we get away with it. I think it's legit. I think it's the right way for us to be working right now. 100% of the algorithms that we have created in our program, they're all rolled out with a human in the loop. In other words, a human being certifies the result of that AI algorithm. And as long as we live in this space, I feel reasonably comfortable, right? As long as Sully is going to grab the reins of the plane before it crashes into the Potomac, I feel pretty good, right? It's once we move into the brave new world where the algorithm will see you now, right? That's the part where we're gonna be fighting with the FDA, I think, quite a bit, right? To figure out what's the bar that we have to agree to of reproducibility with regard to and validity of those algorithms. I will just tell you right now, most of the algorithms we use, I read CT last night and the ED, read it over the weekend when I was on call. We have AI algorithms that just run in the background and are designed to be a second pair of eyes for me and look over my shoulder. And they're wrong about, it depends on the algorithm, about 30% of the time, which is by design. They're not intended to be perfect. They're intended to draw my attention to something so I can use my clinical judgment and decide just exactly, as you said, Rick, thumbs up on this reading or thumbs down. And that's very appropriate for where we are right now. But if we're going to make a next jump, we're talking about a higher bar than than the world we're currently living in.
About that higher bar, just real quick. As you guys can see, this was not rehearsed. We were just handed the script right when we got on stage, so this was all kind of free flow. So there is precedence for this, and I totally agree. We are in the space of mostly human in the loop, and we are very deferential to the healthcare professionals' oversight, which is a key component of what we're doing. But there are some examples that are showing us what's possible. So diabetic retinopathy, for example, is an application where a company was able to do an imaging of the fundus, so IDX, to detect and diagnose diabetic retinopathy out of an image of the eye. It started with a human in the loop. It then became an autonomous diagnosis done by the algorithm, and now it has its own CPT code. So it's reimbursed. Not only do you not need a human, there's also financial incentives and monetization to that solution. There's a few others that operate in some of our implantable devices and so on. The rigor is different, 100% agree. The testing, the validation, the clinical trials, the claim set that you can have on what you need the human in the loop for or not is evolving as some of these solutions come to market. But there are some examples of how we can carefully and methodically move into this space. Because, I mean, just for the sake of being provocative, we are more trusting of a human error than we are of a machine error, even if some of the statistics demonstrate that the machine makes less error than a human. I'm not saying we should start getting treated by machines, but this is a cultural shift. This is a future direction of when is math and statistics and validation and clinical trial enough to convince some people that, look, this is good enough, especially if maybe you're in a rural area. Maybe your next good doctor is 4-hour drive. It's not the same for everybody, and I think we need to keep an open mind around what is possible in the realm of AI.
Absolutely, 100% agree with you. The technology exists right now for AI to fly a plane. Last plane I got on, there was a pilot and a co-pilot, same as always, right? And so some of this is a cultural shift, right? And some of it is who are you willing to let be the person of last resort, right? So, and we're moving from this right now. If an AI helps me read a CT and I read it incorrectly, I'm the one who's liable for that. In the New World Order, when it's just the AI, is it the manufacturer? Is it the person who wrote the code? Was it the guy who came up with the idea? Where is that? Where are we willing to let that, that last final word be? And who are we willing to hold responsibility when something goes terribly, horribly, awfully wrong, as it inevitably will, right? And I think it's super fun. Just exactly as you said, there's a little bit of a different bar depending on what the algorithm does. Diabetic retinopathy, we've got treatments for that. There are good ways to confirm that some of them are more reliable than others. We wrote an algorithm at our institution not that long ago that took a CT scan of the abdomen and just glanced at it and said, what was the likelihood this patient had pancreatic cancer? If you have pancreatic cancer, right, you're not taking a pill, right? You're not going on a diet, you're not trying to eat more leafy greens, right? We're cutting the head of your pancreas out, and this is not. It's not a great. Chris knows this better than I do. There's morbidity and mortality associated with that procedure that is not inconsiderable, right? So we don't do that. Do you know what I mean? We don't let. Right, exactly. A lot of it has to do with just exactly as you say. We have, same as you do, or I'm sure you do at Medtronic, I'm sure you do at U of M. We have a software as a medical device group that goes through and evaluates risk factor categories and says, what is the risk that we are comfortable with taking on, based on not only the potential outcomes, but also the likelihood of that outcome. So I think we're in a fun space right now. This is going to be really exciting as it continues to develop.
Great. So actually, from this thread of discussion about the cultural and what people feel about it, I'm going to jump straight away to question number 6. We'll come back to some of the other questions, which says, introduction of AI in the practice of medicine is going to impact patients as well as providers. So what role does getting people educated in that have? And I guess the point really is that, so for example, one of the things I always think about is that right now, someone, a medical professional, they go through a lot of training and they go through many, many years of experience. And eventually they become real experts. So the question is, when there's a AI advisor on the side, what does the whole journey of becoming an expert look like? How does it change? Thoughts? We have 3 distinguished doctors over here and people from Medtronic experience.
Yeah. Go ahead, Chris.
So I think right now, with the physician in the loop, like a lot of what we're telling clinicians is this is just another data point. So you use all the other data points that you might use, and this might be some predictive algorithm. Does someone have appendicitis, for example, or do they have pancreatic cancer? And you use that as just an extra data point and you're making your diagnosis. And the things that we have to teach doctors when interpreting this is, what does sensitivity mean? What does specificity mean? What does positive predictive value and negative predictive value? How do they understand the potential errors that the algorithm could be making? This way that when we sit down and whenever we deploy an AI system or a solution out at mHealth Fairview, we do a lot of training with the clinicians. And we explain to them, based on this algorithm, this is the probability that it might be right. This is when it might be wrong. And I think that's kind of the bare minimum that we're going to have to do. I think the future is going to include a lot more things, such as explaining how the AI is making that decision to the best way that it can. What's the explainability of that AI? And then also, how trustworthy is that AI's prediction? Maybe that prediction was made on a whole bunch of 40-year-olds. So maybe it's pretty confident when a patient's 40 years old. But what if someone's 80 years old, for example? So those are other things that really need to be integrated into these algorithms. What is the trustworthiness? And this is something that JDeep actually does a lot of research in. And then the other piece that's really important whenever we deploy AI is, how do we monitor that AI? Because this AI models are going to change over time. And we have different practices that we use to decide how often does an AI have to be monitored. So if it's a high-risk clinical scenario, this is something that we need to look at the performance metrics every couple of weeks for that model. And then how much drift is allowed in the model performance when we have to say, hey, it's not safe anymore. We have to turn this off. So some of this is explaining to the clinicians that we have these processes in place. This is how we do it. This is how we evaluate the fairness. These are the different 4 fairness metrics, for example, that we use when evaluating these AI models. But at the end of the day, no AI is perfect. None of these models have an AUROC or accuracy of 100%. And that's why right now, at least, the vast majority, I think there's only one that was just mentioned, one FDA-approved autonomous AI solution. Everything else of the 1,000 FDA-approved software as a medical device is physician in the loop. That's why we have physician in the loop. But again, this is going to change in the future. One of the other things that we're thinking about is, what does medical school training need to look like for AI? Right now, a lot of medical schools will include biostatistics training. But again, AI training is going to be a little bit different. And we don't have that answer right now.
Actually, let me add one other common example to help set more of the context. So for example, if we look at cars, right? As soon as we got automatic transmission, people had to do away with a clutch, right? So now, so people had to say, okay, there's one more thing that I don't have to worry about. Driving became easier, okay? And also, people could pay more attention to safety rather than the gear and the clutch kind of stuff, okay, the stick shift kind of business. Okay, so then another example is, especially for us Minnesotans, Once ABS systems came in, then you had to say, well, you don't need to pump the brake, right? When you start skidding, the system will automatically do it for you. So it made life a little bit easier. In fact, if you try to pump with an ABS system, that's actually dangerous. So the point is that these are examples which all of us can relate to because of driving cars, is that sometimes these technologies, and by the way, both of those are AI technologies because they are essentially based on automatic control systems, which is an AI technology. So the point is that when those kind of things, they take away some of the functions. It's like you drive differently. There's one other thing you don't have to worry about. So maybe are there such examples that are going to happen in how a doctor or other medical professionals operate in the environment? Rick?
Just following up on Chris's comment about what needs to be done in medical school and training. We already have frameworks for this already in decision sciences. So this is what we use now for screening. And being married to a decision scientist, I probably can talk about that. He's also on faculty here. But it's a very extensive process using decision trees and sensitivity analyses that I think we just have to incorporate these new tools into and just follow our typical advanced screening processes we do now. That probably isn't being taught as well as it should be in medical school to understand how to use those tools. And I think that's something that we can move to along with some introduction of biostatistics.
Yeah, 100%. I think the way we educate medical students needs to change. Chris, we've done in our program, we've done some of this at the level of the residency, right? So all the radiology residents in our program get informatics training, and they're trained on kind of strengths and weaknesses of the way that AI looks today. But 5 years from now, that training is going to be obsolete, right? With agentic AI and the other stuff that's happening, we're educating trainees for about maybe the problems from 3 years ago, maybe, and we're trying as fast as we can to modify those programs because the educational needs of the future workforce is different from the way we're doing it right now. So I think we have a long way to go with regard to that. I'm impressed with the way that you're educating your clinicians when you're rolling out. We've struggled to get at that group. We have a tough enough time educating the people who are going to be implementing the AI results, right? And letting them understand not only sensitivity and specificity, but uncertainty, which is an AI concept that is hard for folks to, this patient has, the AI algorithm will not infrequently say, this patient has a 76% risk of having a pancreatic cancer, and I'm 4% certain of that. What do I do with that, right? That piece of it is different, and it's if not unique to AI, certainly is biostatistics that's not the order that I learned it at. So that we need more sophisticated systems to educate learners of the workforce of tomorrow.
Yeah, I mean, I totally agree. And I think Keith Horvath in 2009, a former director of the NIH, mentioned that in a big piece around physicians who use AI will replace physicians who don't use AI. And there was never a mention that there was not going to be a physician, right? And there was no mention about how do you upskill a physician to use AI. But it was the anticipation of, as was said earlier, it's just another data point. There is a human in the loop. And just like you use your, I don't remember addresses anymore. They're all in my phone. I don't remember roads. I navigate through, my phone. So it's, maybe I'm dumber, you could argue, but it's a tool that I use to navigate my life, and I think AI is going to be a physician assisting tool to whatever specialty, whatever discipline, whatever they're doing. That level of education, we're already starting to see some medical programs, including in their curriculums, a little bit of AI. Stanford did a survey a few years back looking at also adoptions and attitudes on AI use by physicians, and they looked at established physicians that are in practice, that have been in practice for decades, and some of the emerging health physicians. Their expectation of AI being a tool available for them to use in their daily practice is very high with young physicians. And you heard earlier from Bill saying if you take away now the ambient listening device, a physician will quit. So we're seeing that shift in demographic and attitude in adoption. But the fact remains, it's a tool. You use it from point A to B, just like you do a CT or you do any imaging or any testing modality. And that evolution will have to progress.
Jaideep, I think a little bit from the patient point of view as well. And I feel optimistic about in terms of sort of patient awareness and patient adoption for a couple of reasons. One is just because of all the expansion of wearables and just the way that AI is entering ordinary life in so many ways, that patients are getting used to the fact that they're going to have something that has AI in it, that's going to help them observe and predict how they're doing on all kinds of measures of their personal health, and the transition from AI there to transition that their doctor is using. I'm optimistic that the patients will begin to make the loop, but still, the second factor is, there's still the reliance and deference to the clinical judgment of the clinician, I think, is still strong. And so if the clinician tells them that the AI is going to help steer the surgical robot that's operating on them, that may seem scary, but I think that the deference to the clinician will help with the adoption of that.
So actually, that's an interesting point you bring up. So again, let me ask the doctors this question: that 10 years ago, someone would come to the doctor and say, "Doctor, these are my symptoms." Maybe 5 years ago, they could say, "Oh, I already read on the WebMD, and this is what it's telling me." Now they will say, "Well, here's what ChatGPT gave me as a prescription or whatever else, right? Analysis." So how are you going to deal with it, and how will you train the doctors to deal with it in the future?
And a week ago, or 2 weeks ago, my sister texted me something and said, "Oh, I saw this on wherever." It said that some of the people who live the longest have the highest cholesterol. Should we really be treating cholesterol? Like, oh my goodness, cut it out. It's difficult, right? There are absolutely good sources, and there are absolutely terrible sources that are out there. And AI is the same as the other resources that are available in the consumer space, right? There's the opportunity for people to get it exactly right and to really develop additional insights into their care. Wearables, I think, there's no question that is absolutely going to explode in the future, and I'm fully supportive of that. There's also a lot of misinformation out there, and the job of the physician is fundamentally the same. The care of and the well-being and the overall health, I would argue, of our patients, and that's just the way that we do that. The interactions are going to be a little different, more than a little different in the future.
Chris, your thoughts?
I was just going to comment that I had tooth pain like a week ago, and I actually went on ChatGPT, typed my symptoms in, said I had a crack in my tooth, went to the dentist. I did have a crack in my tooth, and now I have a crown. Nice. But, it was right in that scenario. But I don't think this is I agree with what Eric said. I don't think this is any different than like Dr. Google. Like, people were already kind of coming in. This is just a more sophisticated version. So I think that hopefully doctors are pretty used to patients coming in and saying, "I Googled this, this is what I think I have." So I think this is just the next iteration of that.
Okay. So there's one other question, number 3, that I want to go back to, because we have all the people here. So question number 3 is, what impact is AI having on medical devices, and what future direction should it take? So we have the head, the global head of AI of Medtronic here. So I'm going to ask him to sort of lead that, but also we have 3 distinguished doctors here. So what do you guys want? So our Medtronic colleague is going to tell us, how is AI going, in the near future or long-term vision, what do you see as AI being in the medical devices? And the doctors should tell us what they want.
Okay, no pressure, right? So everybody taking notes?
Perfect alignment here.
So, I think we danced around a couple of things that probably is worth mentioning. The applications of AI is risk-based, and it's also time-bound. And the applications of AI on clinical decision support systems can vary from the unregulated to the physician in the loop. These are used for routine task automation, some early screening, efficiency. We heard about the ambient solutions. Those are typically, if they're not medically claimable, are in the consumer grade. They're allowed to drift, they're adaptive, they're dynamic. That's the one category where you're seeing the biggest movement because of the generative AI applications. The middle bucket is where the biggest clinical insight is coming from. And these are typically not generative solutions. There's not a single FDA-cleared generative AI solution on the market, so let's be clear on that. These are algorithmic AI, so we're talking about machine learning, deep learning algorithms that detect the polyps, that do these kinds of things. Those are regulated, and these are locked. These algorithms do not drift, they do not vary, they do not adapt. In their current iteration, as the FDA likes them, they are fixed. From the moment you test them and validate them, they stay the same. You want to change, you got to do another submission or change the, the algorithm, redeploy it separately. So there's no fear of drift in some of these solutions. And that's what in some of the implantable devices, the endoscopy solutions, and so on. This is the application of AI and ML to essentially expand indications, provide new clinical insights, and do all of that. The last piece, which is the one that we started the conversation with, which is the evolution towards healthcare 5.0. That's where we start seeing some of these algorithms that are built on general population start becoming more personalized, more N of 1, more predictive, preventative, participatory, and personalized. And those, we're not there yet. So there is not a solution like that on the market right now that is that level of personalization. Those is where you see some of the investments the big companies are making that are able to get into these data. They're working with the FDA, they're working with clinical trials, they're working with physicians to try to design what that future healthcare will look like and what the healthcare needs from some of these applications. And I believe it'll be a combination of generative AI as well as algorithmic AI together. Even though right now there is no generative AI on the market that's FDA cleared. And the reason I say that is if you guys have been watching the news, which I do, about 6 months ago, for the first time, a generative AI solution passed the USMLE with an over 95% score. For the physicians here in the room, they will know the USMLE, for non-physicians, the USMLE is the United States Medical Licensing Exam. You're needed to become a board-certified physician, and there's 3 steps. The passing grade of the USMLE is 60. The GPT that performed exceptionally well in the 6 months ago passed it with over 95, which means it puts it in the 99th percentile of anybody who ever took that exam. So out of 100 doctors who get the board examination, this generative algorithm outperformed 99% of them. Again, this is theoretical medicine. We're not talking about it doing your robotic surgery or anything, but this happened in the short span of a couple of years. So think 5 years out, 10 years out, 15 years out. If this evolution happened this quickly within a span of 2 years, where do you think healthcare is going to be with the applications of some of these generative tools in concert with what physicians want it to do, especially in robotics and in certain high technology areas? So that's the healthcare snapshot. I'm speaking on behalf of all of MedTech here. So we'll listen to the physicians' expectations of that.
This is kind of fun. We got to go with what we want in the AI.
What do you want?
Yeah, what do I want? I think that the biggest thing that I really want is we have so many singular solutions in healthcare. I think in the last panel they said the hospital has 1,500 vendors that they partner with, and a lot of the vendor solutions don't talk to each other, maybe because they're competitors. I don't know. But so I was talking about earlier, in the ICU AI warning system that they have, that just uses vital signs. But it doesn't talk to the Swan catheter that I might have in the patient, which is giving me other numbers. It might not talk to the EEG that the patient has on their head. And we have cameras in all the ICUs. It might not be using computer vision of what's going on in the room and such. So I think a more integrative solution that uses all the potential data feeds to try to add more automation to the practice, more diagnostic prediction, more decision support recommending, consider this treatment. We know that medical error is the 4th leading cause of death in the United States. It's been published in multiple different journals and multiple different studies. And, what can we use as kind of a safety net almost, kind of like the green squares in the colonoscopy, double check this, make sure you don't miss this potential polyp. So how can we use all of this data to try to make medicine safer? That's one thing that I'd like to see. And it's kind of cool as a researcher, we aren't constrained, in companies are constrained by have to build some AI solution that has a business market and they can sell it. Whereas in research, we can kind of sit back and brainstorm and say, what do we want to build? What can we envision? So I'll actually share a grant that we're writing right now. So a few decades ago, Xerox invented the Palo Alto Research Center. It was called PARC. And they got a bunch of leaders together and they said, let's build the office of the future. And that's where they invented the first Ethernet connection. They invented the first GUI. They invented the first mouse. Those inventions came from them coming together and building the office of the future. Ultimately, Steve Jobs would go there and steal a lot of those ideas. They invited him in and gave him a tour. But we are writing a grant right now to envision what does the emergency department of the future look like. And our high-level vision is you walk into the ED, you go in a triage pod, which is autonomous. There's a robot in there. You put a bunch of remote patient monitoring devices on. You then go and sit down in the waiting room. Those devices are scanning your biometrics, are triaging you, saying, this is someone that needs to be seen immediately, or this person's less sick. The ED doc is in the emergency department. They have a screen up. It shows them all the patients in the waiting room and in their ED beds. It has the predicted probabilities there of what the patients might have, so their differential diagnosis. They get tests, the differential diagnosis changing, the list of they could be having a 20% chance of a heart attack or 10% chance of this. As tests come in, those change over time. It also has their triage concern, and it has an early warning score. Are they decompensating? Are they getting healthier? Are they getting sicker? And it can kind of auto exchange that list of patients so that the sicker patients are at the top, or the ones that they need to see are at the top. We're also thinking about operational efficiency. So there's pilots of robots being done in hospitals. There's a robot, Gary, that can actually go into the rooms and clean the rooms after a patient. They could transport patient food trays to their rooms, stock operating rooms, for example. So thinking of lots of automation and then integration of these different AI singular solutions we get to get more personalized type care.
Yeah, I agree, Chris. I want the same thing that you do. I want us to move away from point solutions, right? You mentioned back in whatever it was, August of 2024, there were 950 FDA-approved algorithms. 76% of them were radiology, another something like 11% were cardiology that were imaging-based. They were all point solutions. They're all point solutions. So this integrated idea and being able to take your emergency room of the future and integrate the care that the patient gets in the emergency room with the hospital floor, with the ICU, with the operating room, and then frankly after they go back home again, so that we can transition their care seamlessly across these environments. Think about how much work it takes. So you've got your patient, you've finally come up with the diagnosis, now you want to admit them to the hospital. That should not take as much time as it does to get that transfer. No, it shouldn't, right? And then whether they go to the medical ICU or whether they go to the surgical ICU, whether they go to the CCU or whether they go to a regular hospital bed, that should be something that AI enables, and there should be an air traffic controller that slots them into the spot that they're going. Instead, this is incredibly manual in most hospitals throughout the country. And then once they're discharged, being able to continue to monitor them, predict when they might bounce back, and then expand the continuity of care beyond the walls of the hospital so that we can interact with we have individual point solutions. We don't have an integrated healthcare ecosystem that can enable those kinds of transitions. I think that's really, I'm psyched you're working on it. I'm sure you'll have it solved by the time yeah.
Well, thank you, everyone. Jimmy, want to add something? Okay. Well, I think, Eric, that was a great closing note. Again, as you said that, taking care of patients even when they've left the walls of the hospital, because that was sort of the overall theme. And I think that even though we are done with the time, but still, because the audience has been sitting listening, it's fair only to allow them to ask at least a couple of questions. So, well, I see a person here. The one in the blue shirt, your hand went up.
I was questioning in the context of the vulnerable plaque and trying to move from the kind of reactive to proactive thing. That kind of implies you put a stent in to kind of prevent a heart attack from coming. And I guess I work as director of engineering at a medical device company, and I'm kind of my paradigm is trying to do a double-blind randomized clinical trial. Would that translate into this world of trying to be proactive? And is it even possible to do a double-blind randomized clinical trial? Because wouldn't the doctor have to kind of weigh in on, is this a vulnerable plaque or not?
The natural history of that MI could be used as a control. so because you could do a single arm study. I don't know if you had to necessarily randomize those patients, but there are contemplations of or randomized studies for these therapies, and the randomization would simply be using the AI algorithm versus not randomizing people to that, and it becomes a little bit of an ethical issue, because if you have really good evidence that you can actually predict, and there's good evidence now that these algorithms can predict soft plaque and vulnerable plaque, being randomized to the control arm when you have that capability may be also difficult ethically. But there are a lot of ways to show this, because we know the natural history of plaque rupture and MI is so established that seeing the plaque. I'm just thinking about the New England Journal of Medicine article was written about 2 years ago that looked at vulnerable plaque. It was by the Clearly group, and they demonstrated very, very clearly that they could identify plaques that would rupture later on. And so that established natural history is already there.
Maybe one more question from anyone else have a question? Here. Okay, I see the person at the back with the mask on. Oh, okay, well, go ahead.
Yeah, this has been a wonderful panel, and I think I especially like the discussion with autonomous and non-autonomous. And I'll start with a kind of a thing that comparison with the vehicles. My daughter, 13 years old, we went to San Fran. We got into Waymo, and she started clapping. She said, "Daddy, I was under so much stress when you drive." So the stress is relieved. So next week we got a FSD Tesla, which I don't normally use, and the joy has brought back to our driving, because no one is, rear seat driving and telling me what to do, and we are having a great discussion. I can see that very great example coming with physician-patient interaction with with AI Scribe, right? So suddenly the stress of documenting, the time it takes to document it, suddenly goes away. We can bring the joy in the interaction. But one of the things which I'm a recovering CIO at UC Davis Health, and we got so much innovation. My email box has 10 times increased with generative AI, right? And one of the things which we have found is there's an innovation, but is very different than transformation when we really make an impact. And the gap is this: when we bring this innovation to our clinicians, 95% of what we believe may be value-driven, the clinicians, nurses, and physicians shoot it down. And the reason is actually human in the loop. In many cases, the human in the loop is being exploited by the vendor community to de-risk themselves. And as the FDA commissioner has said, the health system's held up holding the bag if the decision is wrong. So physicians and clinicians don't want to be sometimes in the stage of doing more cognitive decision making when they're unsure of the black box thing. So while it may be initial good to be in the pilot stage, when it comes to real adoption, it may not happen because of the increased cognitive dissonance that may happen, or in decision making, or the burden that may happen with human in the loop. I just want to share that and see if that's something to keep in mind, but also your reflections on that part.
That absolutely resonates. It's amazing what the innovative technologies and tools that are available to our clinicians that never get adopted. It's unbelievable. One of our key proponents of A-Bridge at our institution talks about how it's going to be a game changer, and it's going to. And I asked him, I was like, "Oh, Connor, well, tell me about the training." He's like, "Oh, I'm not trained up. I haven't done that yet." And you think, well, why? What is the change management issue? Is it that they don't want the extra risk, or is it something else? That feel too busy? I'm not entirely sure. I don't know. Chris, have you dealt with that in your?
Like with the scribe technologies, I feel like it doesn't act. It's not at the stage that it really is saving a huge amount of time. You're still doing a bunch of work. Like, if you ask me, like, what do I want? I would want to go in and see a patient, and then it writes a very accurate note that I don't have to change, and it drops the appropriate billing codes. But it's just, and it organizes the note in the way that I would think. And it's not there because it's just trying to predict what's the next token. It's not really like doing clinical reasoning. But I think the thing that I tell people a lot is, like, this is phase one. Imagine where it's going to be in 5, in 10 years. It will get there, and it will save time. We have a thing too, when you get an inbox, it pre-writes so a patient can send a message to the doc, it'll pre-write the response, and the doc can go in and change it. Well, it has variable uptake. In fact, most people don't like it because they have to make a lot of changes to it. and we can actually see how much character count it is and the thumbs up, thumbs down for it. So it's not at the point that it's really saving time. Clinicians like, I just do this faster myself. But I think it'll get there.
I think you call there. I think it's a change management question. When we transitioned from, horse-drawn carriages to cars, you go and ask the horse driver, how do you like the car? They're going to say, oh, it's terrible, right? I mean, it's just the pace of change is very fast. So you're asking someone, how do you like that tool that may or may not change the way you come to work tomorrow? And some of it is a cognitive load, some of it is the attachment responsibility, and some of it is where they are in their career. Because according to that Stanford survey I was talking about, when they asked young doctors, that was an expectation that it would be there for them. And when they asked patients, some of the young patients actually said they will seek out doctors who use AI and these tools in their care versus doctors that don't. So now we're talking about patient preference. We're talking about young generation of healthcare clinicians who are adopting and expecting that technology to be part of their course. So it is a change management question, and it's a maturation of technology. The reason we're having this conversation about this now is because that pace of change is very fast. We've never seen that pace of change in technology in the history of mankind. So all of this evolution only happened within a span of a year or two. You go back to any technological change, it's taken usually a lot longer, so the change management behaviors took a lot longer. So we're dealing with upskilling, with adoption, with acceptance. The key difference here is time. The speed of evolution of this technology is what's making this a problem, not the technology, not the people, and not the need that is going to be addressed. And that's my humble opinion. So.
All right, well, thank you. We'll take one more question because the person already has the mic. Please go ahead and ask it.
Sorry to keep everyone from lunch. But I had a question about the impact that the infrastructure required for AI is going to have on the communities it's intended to help. Is there any discussion among the healthcare community? For example, they say every time you query ChatGPT, you pour out a bottle of water. And we've seen headlines from Memphis, Tennessee, I believe, where methane from those data centers required to power AI is harming those communities. Especially considering that there's a bill going through the Congress right now that would prohibit regulation on AI for the next 10 years. Is there any concern that, talking about these incredibly fast timelines, that implementing this kind of technology is going to ultimately do harm to the communities it's meant to help?
I think it's a great question. We had a conversation similar to this with our team this last week, and in our case, we didn't, forgive me, we didn't care about the impact so much to the community, but we were curious about our run costs for compute. For 200 users, for 20 users, it was costing us about $20,000 a month to run, and that's reflective of the overall what the compute costs, but it's also reflective on the energy and we know for a fact that the things that we're doing, whether they're medical imaging or whether they are running ChatGPT, et cetera, we are absolutely increasing those demands on the system. For sure we are. And it is not sustainable in its current form, I don't believe. We're going to have to make those processes more efficient. And people calling out, hey, is anybody aware of how much this is costing is absolutely a huge deal. Sam Altman recently said, what was it? He said people saying please, adding please or thank you to their. Yeah, and he gave it some absurd number, but it cost him $100,000 every time somebody said please or whatever, just in terms of what the extra, you're just trying to be polite to the machine, and the extra processing load on the machine is costing time, effort, energy, money. All of those things are wrapped up into the same, and we do have to do a better job. We have to be more efficient about the way that we apply these technologies. There's no question about it. In terms of the bill that's going through Congress, I'm not aware and I don't have an opinion, but I think that continuing to be very aware of the potential impact that these tools and technologies that we are developing and deploying is really important.
So just because it's a concern that everybody's having, sorry, 1 second. You're absolutely correct. This is a global topic of conversation. A lot of European and foreign governments are mandating sustainability in AI as well. It's the topic du jour. Everybody's talking about that. So there are ways that are being explored to make this more sustainable, moving to renewable energy sources in data centers, recycling water capabilities, moving to open source technologies, not necessarily needing the highest level of compute for certain questions and so on. So the industry is not blind to that, and they're working towards it. It's the natural evolution. You first introduce something and then you make it more sustainable, more efficient. I mean, we did that with every technology that came out. It gradually gets better, cheaper, more efficient, more scalable, and so on. And AI is no different. We're realizing over the last year, how like a DeepSeek was an example that you didn't need these billions and billions and billions of data sets in training and dollars spent on massive data centers, what you could do with much smaller systems. And we're just waking up to some of these solutions. It's just the gains from generative solutions right now have been shown to be about 30% more cost effective than the uses without it. So if you do, and I'll give you that quick anecdote, if you use a GPT versus a Google search, you spend about 10 times more energy from a typical GPT search versus a typical Google search. But the differential gain in environmental impact is about 30% less with the GPT solution than it is with Google. Because when typically you do a Google, you search and then you go click on these hyperlinks and you go to all down the rabbit hole to formulate an opinion or do whatever you're doing. With a GPT, you can get, especially with the new deep reasoning methodologies, you can basically short a couple of weeks worth of work in a session that's a couple of minutes. So tally up the opportunity cost of spending 2 weeks in front of your computer Googling and searching and reading and printing and, versus something you could do within a couple of minutes. That's the calculus that's being applied now to sustainability and showing that the gains with GPT cannot be just pure one-to-one click versus one click. You have to look at the collective output gains in productivity or value, and that's against what it's costing you to do a simple search. I don't think anybody's advocating let's turn off all the internet and let's get away with cars. It's the question is how do we make it more efficient so it justifies its use? And happy to have that conversation with you a little bit further because we have a carbon neutral commitment on sustainable AI as Medtronic, and it's part of every company's C-suite level conversations.
Great. All right, well, thank you very much to the panelists and to the audience.